The building was a Prussian nobleman's estate originally. And this Jewish agency, first they set it up thinking if Jews just stay together in one place, they won't have to leave. And then they realized they had to leave, and then they started working to get them ways to get out.
So it was men and women?
Men and women,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
About 30 women.
You can see,
Yeah, I can see
there they
it.
are. And my father said, so this guy was the leader of the school. His name was Kurt Bundy. You can see he was very strict. You had to have your room tidy, and you had to have your shoes polished, and you had to line up.
Military style.
In 1933, when Hitler came to power, he was kicked out of school. His family, his mother was smart. She got most of the family out. He had a brother who never disappeared. I mean, they don't know what happened. But my father was lucky. In 1936, he was been kicked out of school, but this German Jewish agency set up a farm school on this estate. It was a Prussian nobleman's estate near the Polish border. It was called Gross Breesen, which means great winds or something like that. And they were teaching mostly city kids farming so that they could get visas to countries that needed agricultural workers, like Brazil, the Dominican Republic. At that time, the Nazis would let people go if they had a visa showing that they were leaving Germany. So that was the purpose. I think when they first set it up, they thought, well, maybe we can stay in this haven if we just sort of stay out of German society. That was early on in 1936. My father came about when it started in 1936. There were about 130 kids there, all ages like 16 to 19 maybe. So you can imagine, it was a castle. It was kind of like Hogwarts without the magic, I think. And it was, the leader of the school was a great dynamic person who not only did they learn farm schools, they studied Portuguese and Spanish because they were going to maybe immigrate to these other countries. They learned at night, they had classes in German history, and they studied Shakespeare, and they put on plays, and they had a little orchestra, and so it was a very sort of idyllic life on a farm. They were learning to be farmers, so they raised the animals, they dug the potatoes, they did the washing, they did the cooking, and it was very much girls did the cooking and the washing, boys did the farming, you know, this is 1936. And so then, in 1938, Kristallnacht, the Nazis came, they smashed the piano, and they arrested all the males who were over 18. My father, they were sent to Buchenwald. My father was somewhere else at the time. He'd already left Breesen. He was sent to Buchenwald also. They met up there, which was lucky, because they had been able to bring blankets and clothing with them, and my father had been arrested on the street. He had nothing. Anyway, they had people on the outside who were working to get them visas to anywhere that would take them. And they managed to get all the Breeseners who were in Buchenwald, all of the men who were over 18, and my father out to Holland. My father left Germany early in 1939. I was in Holland for a year and then came to America. You couldn't get to America, but that's a whole other story, how a whole bunch of Breeseners ended up in America. My father became a dairy farmer, farmed for 30 years, retired, and when he retired, he started talking more about what had happened and showing this book. And as I was growing up, Breeseners would always come visit us, and so I kind of knew a little of the story, but he didn't really talk much about it. But after he retired, he started having reunions, people got together, and a newspaper reporter came to write a story about one of these reunions. She was a friend of Steve Struass, that gentleman over there, who was a photographer. He met my father, saw this album with these tiny, tiny photos, and said, this should be an exhibit. And through a bunch of different things, including my uncle Ray Miller, who is from Pensacola, North Carolina, who gave them the money to blow up the photos, this became the exhibit. And they first showed it in Virginia at the Holocaust Museum in 2008. It was shown in the George Landecker's my father, in the George Landecker room in Barneveld, New York, which is where our farm was. Our farm was in another town, but that's where he retired to, and live 30 years, so everyone who knew my father came to that exhibit. It was nice. My father always felt that the story of what happened to him should be shared. He felt like it's important for people to learn about this place that kind of gave him a sense of, he said, Hitler told us we were the scum of the earth. We had no country. Bundy, the director of this school, told us, you can be farmers, you can be carpenters, you can grow things, you can be someone. You have a life. And it was kind of, for all these people who's had their lives disrupted, it was an education. So it's kind of like college under dire circumstances. You can also understand it if you watch the video. That's why Steve calls it a multimedia exhibit. The video has a lot of the pictures with voiceover, and then toward the end it has the Breeseners themselves in their 80s talking about it and remembering it.
And I have 40 acres, and George and I would have long conversations. And there seemed to be a simpatico of what he went through, what my feeling is about my religion and land and faith. And there seemed to be a shaking of the energy together. So it was great working with him, seeing that this came to fruition. He loved, I think, the Rutgers exhibit because we had farm equipment, and she talks about it in the article about milking the cows with certain equipment, and that was right up his alley. So I think we
he really liked that.
Yeah,
that was a great. It was in an agricultural museum there, so it had all this old equipment. And before the exhibit, my sister and my father and I walked through, and my dad would say, "Oh, that's a tractor, just like what I had in 1946." And Heller and I, my sister and I, were like, "We used to have to wash those milking machines. We hate those."
So where is the farm?
It's in upstate New York, north of Utica, right sort of in the Adirondack foothills. And it's still a working farm. My father sold it to a couple who sold it to a young guy who's still farming.